The observation chamber hummed with the gentle pulse of quantum stabilizers. Through the prismatic glass walls, Lyra watched the scientists pass by, their white coats blurring into streaks of light against the sterile backdrop. Her skin glowed with a soft azure radiance, a side effect of the genetic modifications that made her unique among Nexus Corporation's collection of enhanced beings. She hadn't always been aware of her containment. The first few years were a haze of induced sleep and controlled consciousness. But slowly, like starlight piercing through clouds, awareness had crept in. Now she understood enough to know she was neither fully human nor entirely alien. She was something in between, a carefully crafted hybrid designed to push the boundaries of human potential. The chamber was her world, a perfectly regulated environment where every breath, every movement was monitored and recorded. They called it the Glass Observatory, though Lyra thought of it as her crystal cage. The scientists treated her with clinical detachment, running their tests and logging their observations without ever meeting her eyes. On the other side of the facility, Callum Drake adjusted his maintenance uniform and double-checked his forged credentials. The former intelligence officer had pulled off dozens of corporate infiltrations, but something about this job felt different. His client's interest in Nexus's genetic research division seemed too specific, too personal. "Remember," Jenna's voice crackled through his neural implant, "we need access to their primary database. The genetic sequencing files are paramount." His handler's tone carried an edge of urgency he hadn't heard before. Callum moved through the facility's lower levels with practiced ease, his gait matching the unhurried pace of the regular staff. The security systems were top-tier, quantum-locked doors, biometric scanners, and AI-driven surveillance. But every system had its weak points, and Callum had spent weeks studying this one's rhythms. He was 3 levels deep when he saw it, a flicker of blue light reflecting off the polished floors. It wasn't the harsh glare of security lasers or the steady gleam of status indicators. This light pulsed like a heartbeat. Curiosity drew him toward a junction he hadn't marked in his plans. The corridor ended in a circular chamber dominated by transparent walls that seemed to bend reality itself. And within, a figure that made him forget every protocol he'd ever learned. She sat in the center of the chamber, cross-legged and still as sculpture. Her skin emanated that mysterious blue glow, creating patterns that danced across the glass. But it was her eyes that caught him, deep violet irises that held centuries of loneliness. Lyra noticed him immediately. Unlike the scientists who treated her as a specimen or the guards who saw her as a potential threat, this man's gaze carried something she'd never encountered: recognition. Their eyes met through the glass, and for the first time in her existence, Lyra felt truly seen. Callum knew he should walk away. The mission parameters were clear: get in, extract the data, get out. But something about the woman in the chamber pulled at him, awakening protective instincts he thought he'd buried with his military career. He approached the observation panel, his fingers hovering over the interface. The security feeds showed no immediate threats, but he knew that could change in seconds. "What are you doing?" Jenna's voice cut through his thoughts. "That section isn't part of the mission." Callum muted his neural link. The woman in the chamber had risen to her feet, moving with a grace that seemed to defy gravity. She placed her hand against the glass, leaving trails of luminescence where her fingers touched the surface. His security bypass took 30 seconds, an eternity in an infiltration scenario. When the glass barrier finally retracted, neither of them moved. "Do you have a name?" Callum kept his voice low, aware of the surveillance systems he hadn't yet disabled. She tilted her head, considering the question as if it were a complex equation. "They call me Subject Lambda 7, she said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. "But I've always thought of myself as Lyra." "Lyra," he repeated, the name feeling right somehow. "I'm Callum. And I think we both know you don't belong here." A slight smile curved her lips, and the glow beneath her skin intensified. "Where does someone like me belong?" "I don't know," he admitted, already calculating escape routes and contingencies. "But I'd rather help you find out than leave you in this cage." Alarms blared suddenly, bathing the corridor in crimson light. Callum's neural implant crackled back to life with Jenna's urgent warnings, but he was already moving. He reached for Lyra's hand, expecting resistance or hesitation. Instead, her fingers interlaced with his instantly, her touch sending sparks of energy through his nervous system. The sensation wasn't unpleasant, it felt like drinking starlight. "The Northwest Service Corridor," she said as they ran, her voice steady despite never having run before. "There's a blind spot in their security grid. I've watched them for years, learned their patterns." Callum wanted to ask how she knew this, how she compiled such detailed intelligence while imprisoned, but there wasn't time. Guards were converging on their position, armed with weapons designed to subdue enhanced beings. They reached a junction, and Lyra pulled him left without hesitation. Her bioluminescence had dimmed to a subtle glow, as if she were instinctively adapting to their need for stealth. "There's a maintenance shaft ahead," she whispered. "It leads to the surface level." The shaft was narrow and dark, but Lyra's natural radiance provided just enough light to navigate by. As they climbed, Callum's mind raced through the implications of what he'd done. His client would be furious, he'd abandoned the primary mission objective. The genetic data was still locked in Nexus's servers. But looking at Lyra, watching her move with increasing confidence as she tasted freedom for the first time, he knew he'd made the right choice. She wasn't just another corporate secret to be stolen and sold. She was a person, whatever her origins might be. They emerged into the facility's ground-level loading bay just as the sunset painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. Lyra stopped, momentarily overwhelmed by her first glimpse of the world beyond her chamber. "It's beautiful," she breathed, her skin shimmering in response to her emotions. Callum gently tugged her toward a waiting transport vehicle. "This is just the beginning," he promised. "But we need to move. They'll have the perimeter locked down soon." As if in response to his words, security drones appeared on the horizon, their search beams cutting through the gathering dusk. Lyra's expression hardened with determination. "I can help," she said, raising her hand toward the approaching drones. The air seemed to crystallize around her fingers, and suddenly the drone sensors were overwhelmed by a cascade of false light signatures. Callum stared in amazement. "They never knew what you could really do, did they?" "No," she replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "They were too afraid to push me. Too afraid to see me as anything more than a specimen." They reached the transport, and Callum quickly bypassed its security systems. As they lifted off into the darkening sky, Lyra pressed her hand against the viewport, watching her prison shrink into the distance. "Where will we go?" she asked, uncertainty mixing with hope in her voice. Callum plotted a course for the outer districts, where corporate influence waned and credits bought silence. "Somewhere they won't think to look," he said. "And then we'll figure out the rest together." Lyra nodded, trust evident in her violet eyes. As they flew through the neon-lit channels between towering arcologies, her glow synchronized with the city's pulsing rhythms. She was adapting, evolving, becoming more than what she'd been designed to be. And Callum, watching her discover the world with wonder-filled eyes, felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. New Shanghai's underground districts pulsed with a different kind of life than the sterile corridors of Nexus Corporation. Here, neon advertisements painted the perpetual twilight in kaleidoscopic hues, and the air was thick with the mingled scents of synthetic food and machine oil. For Lyra, whose world had been limited to antiseptic air and measured breaths, every sensation was an overwhelming discovery. She sat cross-legged on a worn mattress in their temporary safe house, watching streams of light filter through the cracked window. Her own bioluminescence had adapted to match the ambient glow of the room, making her seem almost human in the shadows. "Almost. Try it again," Callum encouraged, sitting across from her with a handheld light sensor. "Focus on controlling the intensity." Lyra extended her hand, concentrating on the energy flowing beneath her skin. The blue-white radiance gathered in her palm, coalescing into a tight sphere of pure light. She had discovered this ability by accident during their first night on the run, when fear had transformed her natural glow into a defensive burst that short-circuited a pursuit vehicle. "Better," Callum noted, checking the readings. "You're maintaining consistent output without energy spikes." The sphere of light danced between her fingers as Lyra spoke. "In the facility, they never let me experiment. Every response was measured, every reaction documented, but they never asked what I could feel." She paused, watching the light ripple. "They never knew I could sense the patterns in everything, the rhythms of their security systems, the frequencies of their containment fields." Callum set aside the sensor, his expression thoughtful. The past week had been a crash course in survival for both of them. His underground contacts had provided the bare essentials, shelter, clean clothes, basic supplies, but staying hidden from Nexus's search teams was becoming increasingly difficult. "Jenna's been trying to contact me," he admitted, referring to his former handler. "She's persistent. Whatever was in those genetic files they wanted, it must have been important." Lyra absorbed this information, her light sphere flickering slightly. "Perhaps I am what they were looking for," she suggested. "Not just my genetic sequence, but what it could mean." She closed her fingers, extinguishing the sphere. "I'm beginning to understand that I'm not just different, I'm impossible. My ability to manipulate light shouldn't exist within known physics." A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they watched as a patrol of corporate security drones swept through the street, their scanning beams cutting through the neon haze. Lyra instinctively dimmed her glow to near darkness, a skill she'd perfected over the past days. "We need to move soon," Callum said, already gathering their minimal belongings. "They're searching in a pattern, working their way down from the upper levels." Lyra stood, her movements fluid and silent. "The maintenance tunnels," she suggested. "I can see the power grid's architecture, there's a network of service corridors that runs parallel to the main transit lines." Callum had learned to trust her intuition about such things. Lyra's ability to perceive and understand patterns went beyond simple observation. It was as if she could read the city's electromagnetic pulse like a living language. They slipped out through a back entrance, diving deeper into the warren of New Shanghai's underground. The tunnels were a maze of pipes and power conduits, but Lyra navigated them with unwavering confidence, following invisible threads of energy that only she could perceive. "Wait," she whispered suddenly, throwing out an arm to stop Callum. Ahead, the tunnel intersection glowed with approaching lights. "Security sweep. They're using new scanning frequencies." Callum pressed them both against the wall, into a shallow maintenance alcove. "Can they detect your energy signature?" Lyra closed her eyes, concentrating. "Yes, but..." Her skin began to shimmer, and suddenly the air around them seemed to bend, creating a bubble of distorted light. Through the barrier, the world took on a prismatic quality, like looking through faceted crystal. The security team passed within meters of their position, their scanners sweeping back and forth. But where the beams should have revealed their presence, they instead fractured and scattered, showing nothing but empty tunnel. When the danger had passed, Lyra released her hold on the light, sagging slightly against Callum. "That was new," she breathed. He steadied her, noting how the exertion had dimmed her natural glow. "You're getting stronger," he observed. "More controlled." "I'm remembering," she corrected. "Or perhaps discovering. Every day, I feel more of what I can do, more of what I am." She straightened, her strength returning quickly. "But I'm also remembering more of my time in the facility." Fragments of conversations between the scientists, mentions of something called Project Aurora. Callum's expression sharpened. "Aurora?" That's what Jenna asked about specifically. She wanted any files related to Aurora protocols. They resumed their careful progress through the tunnels, but now with renewed purpose. Lyra led them deeper into the Undercity, toward a sector where the power signatures grew more chaotic and intense. "There's something else," she said as they walked. "Sometimes, in the facility, when they thought I was sedated, I would hear them discuss other subjects. Failed attempts. They called me the only successful integration of what they called stellar DNA. Stellar DNA? Callum frowned. That's not possible. Unless they found something out there, Lyra finished. Something that changed their understanding of what life could be. They emerged from the tunnel into a vast underground chamber filled with humming power transformers. The air crackled with electrical energy, and Lyra's skin responded, her glow taking on new patterns that matched the surrounding electromagnetic field. We need to find out what Aurora really is, she declared, watching her own light dance across the metallic surfaces. Not just for me, but for the others they might create. The ones who might not escape their cages. Callum nodded, already formulating plans. I know someone in the data mining community. She specializes in corporate archaeology, digging up buried projects, forgotten research. If anyone can find a trail to Aurora, it's her. Will she help us? Lyra asked, her violet eyes reflecting the chamber's ambient light. For the right price, Callum assured her. And we have something better than credits to offer, first-hand evidence that Nexus has achieved the impossible. Lyra smiled, and for a moment her glow intensified, filling the chamber with ripples of azure light. In that instant, Callum saw her not as the specimen she'd been created to be, but as something far more remarkable, a bridge between human understanding and something vast and unknown. Then we should go, she said, already sensing new patterns in the power grid, mapping their next move. The longer we stay in one place, the easier it becomes for them to find us. As they made their way back into the labyrinth of New Shanghai's underground, Callum realized that their escape had become something more than just survival. They were embarking on a journey to uncover truths that could reshape humanity's understanding of life itself. And watching Lyra navigate this new world with growing confidence, he understood that she was no longer just running from her past, she was moving toward a future that neither of them could have imagined in that first moment through the glass. The floating cities of Europa rose from the ice-covered ocean like inverse icebergs, their vast underwater sections glowing with bioluminescent algae farms. Above the surface, crystalline towers caught the dim sunlight of distant Jupiter, refracting it into perpetual auroras that danced across the city shields. For Lyra, it was like looking into a mirror of her own nature. The entire city thrummed with light and energy, patterns so complex and beautiful that she found herself instinctively synchronizing with them. The transport labs are in the lower sectors, said Raven, the data archaeologist Callum had contacted. She was a tall woman with silver circuits tattooed along her temples, marking her as a neural interface specialist. If Nexus was moving research materials off-world, they would have come through here. They stood in an observation deck 40 levels below the ice surface, watching massive cargo vessels drift through the underwater docking arrays. Lyra pressed her hand against the transparent barrier, her natural glow reflecting off the reinforced glass. The patterns are different here, she murmured. The city's power grid, it's not entirely human technology. Raven's eyes narrowed with interest. You can sense that. The deep city systems were adapted from discovered alien architecture. Most of it was found right here, under Europa's ice. Like me, Lyra said softly. Something found, something adapted. Callum moved closer to her, protective as always. In the 2 weeks since they'd fled New Shanghai, he'd watched her confidence grow alongside her abilities. But here in Europa, surrounded by echoes of her possible origins, she seemed both stronger and more vulnerable. The Aurora files you extracted are heavily encrypted, Raven continued, bringing up holographic data streams with a gesture. But I found references to something called the Luminous. Ancient artifacts that exhibited properties similar to your abilities. Show me, Lyra requested, turning from the window. Raven projected a series of images, fragments of crystalline structures, partial genetic sequences, energy readings that made no sense within known physics. These were discovered 30 years ago, during the first deep ice expeditions. Shortly after, Nexus Corporation began heavily investing in genetic research. They weren't just studying the artifacts, Callum realized. They were trying to recreate them. To build living versions. Yes, Lyra breathed, her glow pulsing with sudden understanding. That's why the containment systems in my chamber used crystalline matrices. They weren't just holding me, they were trying to resonate with something inside me. A distant alarm suddenly cut through their discussion. Raven's expression tensed as she checked her neural feeds. Security breach in the upper levels. Multiple teams, moving with corporate precision. Nexus, Callum growled. How did they find us? The power signatures, Lyra said, her voice tight with realization. My presence here, I've been unconsciously interfacing with the city's systems. They must have detected the patterns. They moved quickly through the lower levels, Raven leading them through service corridors while monitoring the security feeds. The pursuit teams were moving in organized search patterns, cutting off escape routes methodically. There's something else, Raven said as they hurried deeper into the city's underwater sections. The encryption on those Aurora files. It's adaptive, almost organic. I've never seen anything like it. Whatever Nexus is hiding, it's beyond classified. They reached a vast chamber filled with humming machinery, one of the algae farm processing centers. Massive tanks of bioluminescent cultures cast everything in an ethereal blue-green glow. Lyra's own light shifted to match it, making her nearly invisible among the tanks. We need to split up, Callum decided. Raven, can you get the rest of those files decrypted? Already working on it. I've got a secure facility in the outer rings. Meet me there in 6 hours. She transmitted the coordinates through their secure channel before disappearing into a maintenance shaft. Alone now, Lyra turned to Callum. They're not just coming for me, she said. They want to know how much we've learned. About the artifacts, about what I really am. Then let's show them, Callum replied, drawing his pulse pistol. Lyra closed her eyes, extending her awareness into the chamber's systems. The alien architecture Raven had mentioned, she could feel it now, singing to her on frequencies she'd never known existed. Her light began to change, taking on patterns that seemed to fold through dimensions that shouldn't exist. I understand now, she whispered. The luminous weren't artifacts. They were messages, left in a language of light and energy. And I can read them. The chamber's illumination shifted, responding to her presence. The bioluminescent cultures in the tanks began to pulse in synchronized patterns, creating waves of light that disrupted scanning systems and confused pursuit teams' targeting arrays. Through their neural link, they heard Raven's voice, the files. I got through the first layer. Lyra, you need to see this. The genetic sequences they used, they're not just alien, they're impossible. They exist in more dimensions than our universe should allow. A blast door at the far end of the chamber burst open, admitting a team of Nexus tactical operatives. Their leader stepped forward, and Lyra felt Callum tense beside her. Jenna, he said flatly. Hello, Callum. The handler's voice was cold. I see you've done more than just compromise the mission. You've activated the subject's full potential. She has a name, Callum growled. She has a purpose, Jenna corrected. One far more important than your misguided rescue attempt. The Luminous left us more than just artifacts, they left us a warning. And she's the key to understanding it. Lyra stepped forward, her light now so intense it made the tactical team's visors spark and malfunction. I'm not your key, she said. I'm not your specimen. I'm what they intended, a bridge between what humanity is and what it could become. The chamber's tanks shattered as waves of pure energy rippled outward from her form. But instead of flooding the chamber, the bioluminescent cultures hung suspended in intricate patterns, forming equations and symbols that shouldn't have been possible. The message, Lyra continued, her voice resonating with new harmonics. I can see it now. The Luminous didn't leave weapons or warnings. They left a gift, the key to ascending beyond physical form. And Nexus wanted to weaponize it. Jenna raised her hand, and the tactical team took aim. You don't understand what's coming. What we're trying to prepare for. No, Lyra said softly. You don't understand what's already here. She reached for Callum's hand, and where their fingers touched, light seemed to bend reality itself. The suspended cultures began to spin, forming a vortex of living light that expanded to fill the chamber. "Run," Lyra whispered to Jenna and her team. "What's about to happen here isn't meant for weapons or warfare. It's meant for transformation." The light intensified, and Callum felt Lyra's consciousness brush against his through their joined hands. In that touch, he saw what she had discovered, the true nature of the luminous, the gift they had left buried in Europa's ice, waiting for someone who could understand it. As the chamber filled with impossible geometries of light and energy, Jenna and her team fled. But Callum stayed, his hand tight in Lyra's, watching as she began to translate a language written in starlight and possibility. The message of the luminous was about to be heard, and nothing in Europa's floating cities would ever be the same. The quantum research facility atop Europa's highest spire pulsed with unstable energy. Raven's decrypted files had led them here, to the heart of Nexus's most classified project. Through the reinforced windows, Jupiter's vast form dominated the horizon, its atmospheric bands casting a perpetual twilight across the ice. Lyra stood in the center of the facility's main laboratory, her form barely contained by physical space. The message of the luminous had changed her. Light didn't just emanate from her skin now, it bent around her in complex fractals, each pattern containing encoded information that only she could fully comprehend. "The quantum core is destabilizing," Raven reported, her neural interfaces streaming data faster than human eyes could process. Whatever they were researching here, they didn't want anyone to find it. Callum moved through the facility, disabling security systems with practiced efficiency. But his attention never strayed far from Lyra. The connection between them had deepened since the incident in the underwater chamber, allowing him glimpses of what she was becoming. They were trying to reproduce the luminous effect artificially, Lyra explained, reading patterns in the facility's dying systems. Creating quantum bridges between dimensions, hoping to access the same plane of existence that gave birth to the original artifacts. "And you're what they got instead," Callum said softly. "Something they couldn't control." Lyra's light rippled with affection at his words. They wanted weapons, defenses against cosmic threats they didn't understand. But the luminous weren't about destruction, they were about transcendence. The facility's alarms suddenly screamed to life. Through the quantum interference, they heard Jenna's voice over the general broadcast: "You've accessed restricted systems. The facility's containment protocols are failing. If the quantum core breaches, it'll take half of Europa with it." "She's right," Raven confirmed, her expression grim. "The core's reaching critical resonance. We have maybe 20 minutes before total failure." But Lyra was already moving, her consciousness expanding into the facility's quantum architecture. Through her enhanced perception, the failing systems appeared as streams of probability and potential, each one singing with familiar harmonics. "I can stabilize it," she said, her voice overlaid with mathematical harmonies. "The quantum core, it's based on fragments of luminous technology. I can read its patterns." "Lyra, wait," Callum stepped toward her, concern evident in his voice. "The energy levels could overwhelm you." She turned to him, her violet eyes now containing galaxies of light. "Do you trust me?" "Always," he answered without hesitation. Lyra smiled, and for a moment, her light touched him with the same warmth as that first meeting through the glass. Then she turned to the quantum core, raising her hands as reality itself began to bend. The core's chamber was a sphere of contained chaos, where matter and energy existed in superposition. As Lyra connected with its systems, her consciousness expanded exponentially. She could see everything now, the true nature of the luminous, the message they had left for humanity, and her own role in delivering it. They weren't visitors from another world, she broadcast, her thoughts reaching everyone in the facility. They were humanity's potential future, reaching backward through time and space, showing us a path forward. Through their connection, Callum saw what she saw, beings of pure energy and consciousness, existing across multiple dimensions, having transcended the limitations of physical form. The artifacts they'd left weren't weapons or tools, they were seeds, planted throughout the cosmos, waiting for species ready to evolve. The quantum core's chaotic energies began to stabilize, forming patterns that matched Lyra's own internal harmonics. But as she brought the system under control, her physical form started to fluctuate, becoming increasingly luminous. "Lyra," Callum called out, fighting against the waves of quantum energy to reach her. "You're transforming." "I know," she replied, her voice now existing on multiple frequencies simultaneously. "But I'm not leaving, I'm becoming. And I want you with me." She extended her hand, offering not just physical contact but a bridge between states of being. Through their touch, Callum would see what she had become, what humanity could become. Raven's voice cut through the quantum harmonics, "More Nexus forces incoming. They've realized what's happening. They'll try to stop this." "They can't," Lyra said simply. "The change has already begun." The quantum core pulsed with new purpose, its energies no longer chaotic but precisely controlled. Through Lyra's intervention, it had become what it was always meant to be, a doorway to higher dimensions of existence. Jenna burst into the chamber with her tactical team, their weapons charged. But they froze at the sight before them, Lyra and Callum, suspended in a matrix of living light, their forms beginning to transcend conventional physics. "The luminous didn't leave us weapons," Lyra's voice echoed through dimensions. "They left us an invitation. A chance to join them in the light." The quantum core's chamber filled with impossible geometries as reality itself began to transform. Those present saw glimpses of what awaited, a state of existence where consciousness and energy were one, where the barriers between minds and stars dissolved into pure potential. "Make your choice," Lyra offered to everyone present. "Stay bound to what you are, or become what you could be." Callum's grip on her hand tightened, his trust absolute. Around them, others began to understand, to see the truth that Nexus had missed in their quest for weapons and power. The light grew until it outshone Jupiter itself, marking the moment when humanity first touched its own transcendent future. In that luminous space between what was and what could be, a new chapter in evolution began. And at its heart were two souls who had found each other through a barrier of glass, whose love had opened a door to the infinite. The transformation began not with a bang, but with a whisper of light across dimensions. Through the quantum core's stabilized matrix, Lyra's consciousness expanded like a nova, carrying with it the accumulated knowledge of the luminous. But unlike her creators, she didn't ascend alone. Callum's hand remained linked with hers as their physical forms dissolved into pure energy, their consciousness merging with patterns that existed beyond space and time. Through their connection, others in the chamber began to understand, to see the gift that had been waiting in Europa's ice. "This is what they feared," Lyra's thoughts rippled through the quantum field. "Not invasion or destruction, but evolution itself. The power to choose our own transcendence." The facility's quantum architecture began to resonate with their transformation, creating cascading waves of possibility that spread through Europa's floating cities. In the streets and towers above and below the ice, people stopped as they felt the first touch of higher awareness brush their minds. Jenna lowered her weapon, her tactical team following suit as understanding dawned in their enhanced neural networks. "All this time," she whispered, "we were preparing for the wrong kind of contact." Through the quantum field, Raven's consciousness joined the expanding network of awareness. Her neural interfaces, once cutting-edge technology, now seemed like primitive stepping stones toward what they were becoming. The data was never encrypted, she realized, her thoughts merging with the collective understanding. We just couldn't perceive all its dimensions until now. The transformation accelerated, but not as Nexus had feared. There was no loss of self, no dissolution of identity. Instead, consciousness expanded to encompass new layers of reality while retaining the core of what made each individual unique. Lyra and Callum remained at the heart of the change, their combined consciousness acting as a bridge between what humanity was and what it was becoming. Through their connection, others found their own paths to transcendence. Some chose to remain in physical form, becoming living anchors between dimensions. Others followed Lyra's lead, their consciousness evolving beyond the constraints of matter. But all were connected through the quantum network that now spanned Europa's cities. This is what the Luminous wanted, Lyra shared through the field of unified awareness. Not subjects or specimens, but partners in cosmic evolution. They left pieces of themselves throughout the universe, waiting for species ready to take the next step. From their new perspective, they could see the true scope of the luminous vision, a galaxy gradually awakening to its own potential, consciousness evolving one world at a time. Europa was just the beginning. The quantum core, once a tool for weapons research, became a permanent gateway between states of being. Through it, humanity would learn to navigate higher dimensions, to exist simultaneously in multiple forms of consciousness. Callum's essence intertwined with Lyra's in the quantum field, their love transcending physical bounds while maintaining the spark that had first connected them. What now, his thoughts asked, though he could already see the infinite possibilities spreading before them. Now we become what we were always meant to be, Lyra answered, her consciousness expanding to encompass the stars themselves. Not just observers of the cosmos, but active participants in its evolution. The transformation rippled outward from Europa, touching minds across the solar system. Some would resist, clinging to old forms and fears. But the door was opened, the path revealed. Humanity's next great journey had begun. In the quantum field, Lyra and Callum moved among the stars, their consciousness dancing through dimensions that no human language could describe. They were explorers now, guides for others who would follow the path of transcendence. The glass observatory where their story began still stood in Nexus's abandoned facility, its crystalline walls reflecting light in patterns that seemed to hold hidden meaning. But the cage it represented was long behind them, transformed like everything else by the power of recognition, trust, and love. Throughout the solar system, others would feel the call, the invitation to evolve beyond their current limitations. And when they looked to Europa's shining cities, they would see not just physical structures but quantum bridges to a higher state of being. Lyra and Callum had become more than their creators could have imagined, more than simple weapons or specimens. They were the first notes in a new symphony of consciousness, their love story woven into the very fabric of space-time. And in the quantum spaces between stars, where light and consciousness merged into pure potential, their journey continued. For evolution, they had learned, was not a destination but an eternal dance of becoming. The Luminous had known this truth eons ago, seeding the cosmos with the potential for transformation. Now, through the unlikely union of an engineered being and a disillusioned soldier, that potential had finally flowered. In the end, it wasn't about escaping or fighting or even surviving. It was about recognizing the light within each conscious being, the capacity for growth, for connection, for transcendence. And as their transformed consciousness reached out to touch distant stars, Lyra and Callum carried with them the simple truth that had started everything. Sometimes the most profound evolution begins with a single moment of genuine recognition, through a barrier of glass, between two souls ready to see each other for what they truly are. The story of humanity's transcendence would be told in many ways across many worlds. But it would always begin with them, the specimen who became a bridge, and the soldier who learned to trust in something greater than himself. Together, they had opened a door that could never be closed, starting a transformation that would echo through dimensions until the end of time itself.